Order. Now resume.
If we could pull up the policy and practice report number 21, please. And if we could go firstly to page 44. Mr. Commissioner, there's two statements in this policy and practice report which we have identified which may not be entirely accurate, and I'm going to ask a couple of questions in hopes of clarifying the true state of affairs. Looking at paragraph 102, Mr. Wong, I'm going to ask you about this. Or actually, Mr. Higgins, I think perhaps you're the right person to ask about this one. Paragraph 102 reads, specific circumstances delayed the comptroller's approval of the Bridge River water use plan until March 2011. The consultative committee report was completed in 2003 and supported by all participants except for one abstention, the Statliam Nation. I understand that to be an inaccurate statement, Mr. Higgins. I wonder if you could just explain to the Commissioner what the true state of affairs was, who the abstention was, and what Statliam's degree of participation was.
That's correct. It is an error. The Statliam Nation were observers in the process. They were not participants in the process. They were observers, and it was the town of Lillooet that was the abstention.
Thank you for that clarification. Turning over the page to page 45 in paragraph 106, Mr. Wong, there's a question I'd like to ask you about paragraph 106, which states that the department has issued a Fisheries Act authorization for BC Hydro's Shuswap project. I understand that statement's an error. I wonder if you could correct it for us, please.
You're correct in that it's an error. The authorization is under development and largely close to closure, but it's not complete yet.
Okay, so it's close, but just not quite there.
Right.
Well, while we've got you talking, Mr. Wong, I'd like to address several questions related to the Camano project to you. You were DFO's representative on the Nechako Fisheries Conservation Program from 1998 to 2004.
I was the technical committee representative or the alternate during that time, yes.
Thank you. During the time of your experience with that project, what were your observations with respect to the effectiveness of the summer temperature management program in achieving its target?
It was largely effective, not perfectly so, but within the bounds and limits of the operating infrastructure, it was meeting the objectives as far as the committee was concerned.
Okay. You have some familiarity with the Nechako Environmental Enhancement Fund?
Yes.
I wonder if you could please explain to the Commissioner what that fund is.
Well, briefly, it comes out of the a 1997 agreement between the province of British Columbia and what was then Alcan, reconciling issues coming out of the decision to cancel Camano completion. And the fund, at least as I would describe it, is one where Alcan has committed to put up to $50 million into the fund on a matching basis based on a contribution first coming from some other party.
Is the other party specified?
No, not to my knowledge.
And how much of that $50 million, if you know, is still available?
I think most. There's been somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 to $2 million, to my understanding, used for studies that were done investigating the feasibility of a cold water release facility. But I'm not absolutely certain on those numbers.
To your knowledge, are there any other parties who have agreed to put up money on a matching basis?
Not at this time, except for the portion that I was describing. I think British Columbia also put some money in towards those studies on the cold water release. Not sure if, Glenn, you know more detail on that?
Yeah, Mr. Davidson, if you can assist with that, that would be helpful.
Sure. I mean, yeah. So both the province and Rio Tinto Alcan has put money into those commitments under the NEEF fund. Yes.
Okay. Does the province have a amount of money, such as the $50 million that Rio Tinto Alcan has pledged, that's available?
The province has not set aside funds for that yet. No.
Okay. Have they committed to contribute funds to a certain dollar amount?
Not over and above the the agreement. This comes out of the 1987 agreement. But I mean the partitioning of funds or anything like that. There's been no more agreement by the province other than what's in that agreement. If that's what you're asking, or is?
Has the province, as a result of that agreement, pledged a certain dollar amount?
No.
We heard some evidence with respect to potential release facilities at the Kenny Dam that have been considered, one a deep water release facility and one a surface water release facility. And I understand as a result of some conversations with Dr. McDonald and others, you have made some inquiries as to the present thinking on potential cost of both of those two types of release facilities. Is that right, Mr. Wong?
Yes, I got some information, just clarifying a few numbers yesterday.
I wonder if you can share with the Commissioner the results of your inquiries.
Just with regard to costs?
Yes.
And I think, as I understand the issue, it's trying to understand the comparative cost between a surface water release facility and a cold water release facility. There was a study done in 2009 that put an all-in cost for a surface water release facility at about $259 million. And of that, about 150 million was the construction of the facility itself, and then the rest of it is other necessary things to operate the facility. And there is a previous calculation done for slightly different purposes for a cold water release facility, and that put it in the neighborhood of 190 million. So the closest that I could sort of generate that compares roughly equivalent things is a surface water release facility, just its construction would cost about $150 million. A cold water release facility would cost about $190 million, but the cold water release facility numbers are a little bit older, so those costs would likely be proportionally a little bit more.
Okay. And there's, of course, as you've alluded to in your evidence, other costs in the tens of millions of dollars which would be associated with putting in place the operation of these facilities.
Yes, that's my understanding, and I think it's addressed in some of the material that is in the Rio Tinto Alcan binder there.
You're aware, Mr. Wong, that the province and Rio Tinto Alcan have recently decided to reconvene the NEEF, it's the Nechako Environmental Enhancement Fund Management Committee.
Yes.
Have you received information as to why that's happened?
Not formally, but in conversations with people that I know who have been involved with me on the file over the years, it's recognizing that the original decision, which was to pursue a cold water release facility at Kenny Dam, has now not feasible or viable or going to meet all the objectives that it was originally thought it might. There is a desire to move past that point and say, well, what do we do now?
So it's for the purpose of exploring alternative uses for the funds that are available.
That's my understanding. Yes.
Mr. Davidson, does that accord with your understanding?
It is. I would describe it as you know, there's been 10 years of work since the original NEEF, or in the order of 10 years of work, and since then we've realized the costs are considerably higher, the risks are high, it might not meet objectives. So it's I think appropriate to reconvene NEEF, put the information in front of them, and see if there's a better use of the fund.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to turn now to the issue of independent power projects. Mr. Wong, with respect to any independent power projects that may have impacts on an anadromous fish, what is the Department of Fisheries and Oceans' degree of involvement in the process for approval of those projects and in monitoring the projects once they're in place?
It would fall under the umbrella of our habitat management program and largely follows a pattern for any type of development where if there is a project proposed that has the potential for a significant impact in a highly sensitive or important fish habitat, for instance, a place where salmon live, that Fisheries and Oceans would review it pursuant to our authorities under the Fisheries Act and the guidance in our habitat policy. If something would potentially trigger a regulatory decision like a Fisheries Act authorization under Section 35 for harmful alteration of fish habitat, we would also do an environmental assessment under SEA that would be linked to whether we would make a favorable decision on that project.
Does the department, prior to issuing an authorization for a project such as this, engage in any form of public consultation?
If there was an authorization if there was a statutory decision such as issuing an authorization to harm fish habitat under Section 35, we would have to do an environmental assessment under SEA before we could make that decision. And part of that environmental assessment would typically provide for public engagement.
What proportion of independent power projects that have gone forward have gone down that path and actually had the formal public engagement?
I couldn't say for sure. I'd have to say I'm not aware of any that haven't, but I can't say for sure about that.
I wonder if we could have our document 25 on the screen, please.
So this document is largely a summary of work done by an internal working group that we have within Fisheries and Oceans that tries to categorize potential in-stream flow diversions or works into sort of streams, so that we can identify both for ourselves and to potential project proponents the considerations that Fisheries and Oceans would have and what the likelihood of certain decisions or outcomes or pathways would be. And the intent was to make sure that a project proponent would understand that if you're proposing something that was going to have a potential significant effect in a sensitive or high value fish habitat, that there was going to be difficulty in getting that approved and potentially a decision that would not be supportive of that. And to try to push proponents, if they were going to be exploring projects for significant water use or in-stream flow use, towards the green side of this matrix that would have lower risk to fish and fish habitat.
Was this document created and is it used specifically for independent power projects?
It was initially, that was the focus, but it's not exclusive to that.
Has the department authorized the construction of or implementation of any independent power projects in salmon-bearing waters?
I don't know for sure. I don't think so.
In your area?
In my area, I have to say again, I don't know for sure. None that I'm aware of recently. I am aware that there are some that are sort of in various stages of proposal, but there's none that I'm aware of in anadromous waters that we've approved recently.
Are you aware of any existing or proposed independent power projects that have the potential to impact on sockeye migration?
Not in any substantive way, no.
Mr. Davidson, what's your answer to that question?
I was just, considering that there's about 650 applications right now, so I can't speak to all of those, whether there could potentially be, but I can't speak to that.
With respect to the independent power projects that are presently operating, Mr. Wong, what role does the department play, active role, if any, does the department play in monitoring the operation of these and their potential impacts on fish or fish habitat?
Well, there aren't many in our operating area, and our monitoring is sort of fit in the context of monitoring all other types of land use and water use that have the potential to affect fish and fish habitat. So we do go out and have a look, but I would not describe it as extensive.
Mr. Wong, does the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, I'm coming back to the commando issue just for a moment, does the department have a position, or have they expressed a position on what the NEEF funding ought to be used for in their view?
No, not at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Commissioner, those are my questions for this panel. And if we could just mark the last document as an exhibit before I sit down.
Yes, tab 25 will be marked as 1876.
Good morning, Mr. Commissioner. It's Charles Fugere, spelled F-U-G-E-R-E, Counsel for Canada. I'm here with my co-counsel, Mark East. I was allocated 30 minutes. And I'd like to start with the topic of Water Act modernization and water regulation. Lots of these topics have been touched upon by yesterday's panel, but I will mostly direct my questions to Mr. Wong. I want to give him a chance to weigh in from a DFO management perspective. If we could please have document tab 15 on Canada's list on the screen, please. Mr. Wong, do you recognize this document?
Yes.
Could you explain briefly what this is?
It's a brief summary, I guess, of DFO's review and engagement and key points on Water Act modernization.
So is it true that these would be the comments that DFO forwarded to BC after looking at a draft version of the Water Act modernization discussion paper, which is now Exhibit 1870?
This would reflect the main points, yes.
Could I please have this marked as the next exhibit?
1877?
Thank you. If we could please go to page 3, bullet 9. Thank you. I'll just read that bullet. Metering is proposed as a requirement for large water users, but the problems facing aquatic ecosystems are often the result of many small, cumulative, and incremental withdrawals. How is it contemplated that the broader array of withdrawals will be monitored? Now, this is something that Dr. Orr has discussed yesterday, and I wonder, Mr. Wong, if you could elaborate on whether it is something that you consider important in the management for the sustainability of sockeye.
Well, I think it's important. Certainly, I wasn't here yesterday, but I understand that the relationship between groundwater, surface water, and fish habitat was discussed to some degree. And from a fisheries and oceans perspective, what we are concerned about are changes to the water regime in a stream that can have negative effects to fish and their fish habitat. With the groundwater interaction, it is not always an obvious interaction, but nonetheless it can be a significant one in terms of contributing cooler waters during warm times of year, contributing consistent water during dry times of year, and even contributing warm water during cold times of year. So there are numerous ecological benefits from groundwater to fish and fish habitat, and I think from a fisheries and oceans perspective, we would be supportive of measures that would allow for thoughtful and hopefully effective regulation in that regard.
Thank you. And on the issue of focusing on large users, is this something that you have concerns with?
Well, I don't think we are opposed to regulating large users, but the concern would be not having a effective degree of regulation and monitoring on the small users, for the point that's illustrated in this bullet about the effect of small cumulative incremental withdrawals.
And another topic of concern that the Commissioner heard about yesterday is the fact that some streams in the Fraser watershed might be oversubscribed in terms of the water licenses issued. Is this a concern that you share as a habitat manager?
Certainly, we have seen the results of the interaction between low flow conditions that might be starting with a natural situation compounded by effects of human water use in many salmon streams, particularly in the southern interior, and it's an ongoing issue.
Do you see the Water Act modernization process as a good opportunity to address some of these issues?
I think from a fisheries and oceans perspective, we see potential there. There is certainly some uncertainty, at least within DFO's side, as to how the Water Act modernization may or may not create opportunities to deal with historic water licenses. It's our general impression that new water licenses moving forward will have the potential to address some of the things that we've seen emerge as shortcomings historically.
Mr. Davidson, you've heard Mr. Wong respond to Mr. McGowan earlier about the fact that he has a concern that BC possibly does not have all the resources it needs to fully implement the regime that will come out of the new Water Act. Do you share some of his concerns?
Moving forward, I mean, with any new legislation, we do a lot of economic analysis that would be part of that. So there would be various resource requirements to implement any kind of new regime, and that would be part of the entire Water Act modernization package. So I can't speak to what resources will be in the future, but that will be part of the package.
Thank you. So back at you, Mr. Wong. How much of the success of the new regime that will follow from the Water Act modernization process will depend on its successful implementation?
Well, from a sort of a manager level, not too far from the ground level, I guess, I would say that it's very important, and it's not necessarily something that is only going to be achieved through dollars. It also would require policy commitments and regulatory commitments, and all the good ideas in the world written on paper don't necessarily mean much if they don't translate to effective results. And I think all of us in government can see that and have experienced that.
Thank you. Before we leave that topic, how would you assess the current cooperation between DFO and BC on the issue of Water Act modernization?
It's my impression that it's very good and very cooperative. BC has been very open to involving DFO in the process, and it's our impression that the input we're providing seems to be well received.
I'll move now to the water use planning process. First question for you, Mr. Wong. Are the water use plan currently in place, do you consider them an effective management tool to mitigate the impacts of hydro operations on Fraser's Hawkeye?
Yes, they certainly much better than the circumstances that existed before. And with the benefit of the research and the multi-party input and perspectives that went into those, I think we find them to be very effective.
And has BC Hydro been a helpful partner for DFO in terms of managing environmental issues?
Certainly. I wouldn't necessarily want to say that everything is perfect all the time. We do have our occasional points of friction, but at the same time, my understanding of how major hydro utilities across Canada operate in terms of fisheries considerations, I would describe BC Hydro as at the forefront in terms of considering fisheries and environmental circumstances.
Mr. McGowan has discussed with you briefly the Bridge Coastal Fish and Wildlife Restoration Project. Can you elaborate briefly on what DFO's contribution and role is as part of the BCRP?
Sure, I think Mr. McGowan raised that to Mr. Higgins.
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
But Fisheries and Oceans has been invited by BC Hydro to be part of the steering committee, and we've also been involved technically in terms of providing in-kind support or steerage and guidance to numerous projects that have occurred under the umbrella of that program.
Mr. Higgins, we've heard that the water use planning process is quite adaptable, and that BC Hydro is open to new input. Has there been a situation where disagreement on how to interpret the water use plan at the Bridge Seaton facility, for example, may have led to specific concern affecting Sockeye?
Yes, I think that there has been some difficulty in interpreting particularly the upstream migration component and the dilution rates, and so there's been lots of dialogue. And part of that is a learning process on both sides as new staff are integrated into the system to support the operational function. I think that's on both sides, but yes, what we have done is work together to find the solution. So as Mr. Wong pointed out, there are times friction. There is times friction, but at other times, overarchingly, we've successfully found our way through those issues.
Thank you. I'll follow up on your answer with this discussion on the dilution ratios. It's something that has been presented to me as a true Sockeye issue, so it might be worth exploring. You've mentioned, Mr. Higgins, that one of the objectives of the water use plan at the Bridge Seaton facility is to ensure that the returning adult Sockeye migration is not impeded by the dilution ratios. And I understand that to deliver on this objective, one of the things that BC Hydro is doing is it operates a fish counting station to monitor the passage of these returning adults. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And would you agree with me that to be successful at meeting this objective and for the fish counting station to be efficient, it's fair to say that the data from the fish counting station must be assessed in real time in case a response is needed?
That's a fair statement.
And have you been successful at collecting and processing the data in real time to meet the objective under the WEP thus far?
Pardon me?
Have you been successful at basically collecting and processing the data from the fish counting station in real time so far?
I would say we have not been successful, but we're trying to improve on that.
Thank you. Mr. Wong, do you agree with what Mr. Higgins just said?
Yes, I think we share the same perspective. The concern Fisheries and Oceans has is making sure that we've got the information available in real time such that if fish passage is being impeded, that a suitable response could be considered. All that, and what I should say at the end is we haven't seen a problem in that we can see the fish showing up on the spawning grounds for the most part, but we are also, with the limitations Mr. Higgins was describing, not currently having available a tool that would be able to detect en route issues at this time.
Thank you. I'd like to go to Canada tab 13, please. This is the terms of reference for the DFO BC Hydro Fish Hydro Management Committee. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
Could you explain briefly what this committee is about?
This committee was put together to provide a forum for us to explore fisheries and aquatic issues, and so that we could do that with the province and with DFO.
Thank you. Could that be the next exhibit, please?
Exhibit 1878.
Could we please have document 14 on Canada's list? Mr. Higgins, is this what is usually referred to as the compliance protocol?
No, this is not.
Oh. I'll ignore that. Sorry. I'll move on to Kamano. One quick question for Mr. Wong. The commissioner has heard from the science panel about the several options that have been studied to change the current status quo of the operation of the summer temperature management program on the Nechako River. And from a management perspective, what is DFO's main priority when assessing whether or not to support any of these the alternatives?
Well, there are several considerations. I think one that DFO has developed fairly recently, like over the last 3 or 4 years, has been to make sure that conditions are not worse for sockeye, including the sections downstream of the Stewart confluence. And that came as a result of some of the work that Dr. McDonald did with his counterparts. We also are interested and concerned about effects it may have on Chinook salmon in the Nechako, as well as Chinook salmon migrating up into the Nechako and other places. There are concerns about how decisions would affect white sturgeon, which are Sarah listed in that area, as well as other resident fish species, fish in the Nechako Reservoir, fish in the Mauritius Lata system, and even so far as how it affects fish in the Kamano system at the other end of the infrastructure.
I'll be moving on now to the issue of IPPs. If we could please have Exhibit 1876, that was Commission tab 25. Now, Mr. Wong, when I'm looking at this chart, trying to understand where sockeye would fit in this situation, I'm using the first row, which is called fish presence. I see that the reference to anadromous fish is in the 4th column, labeled high to unacceptable risk. Is that a proper reading of the chart?
Yes.
So does that mean that any proposed IPP that would potentially affect sockeye or sockeye habitat would be processed or reviewed according to what's outlined in the 4th column?
Yes, that's certainly where it would start.
And that includes the SIA assessment, as you described for Mr. McGowan earlier, is that correct?
Yeah, it would, a decision that looked like it may be leading to considering an authorization would require a SIA screening before we could issue that authorization.
Thank you. Can we please have document number 4 on Canada's list of documents? Mr. Wong, do you recognize this document?
Yes.
Can you explain briefly what this is?
This is a 2-page document that essentially gives some description that would align with the table that was just shown previously. And the intent is to provide this to a potential IPP proponent so they could understand the perspective of fisheries and oceans on projects. And I think, as I described earlier, the hope was to steer proponents who were contemplating a project away from those on the red side of that matrix and down towards the green side, which would be situations that would have a lower risk or lower impact to fish and fish habitat.
Could that be the next exhibit, please?
Be 1879, go to tab 14.
No, thank you. And if we can please have now document number 5 on Canada's list. the DFO Pacific Region Small Hydro In-Stream Flow Working Group Terms of Reference. Are you familiar with this document, Mr. Wong?
Yes.
Could you explain briefly what this working group is about?
Within Fisheries and Oceans Ecosystem Management Branch, we have provision for working groups that would work on collective issues that occur throughout our region. The idea is to share expertise, to provide for some degree of consistency, and sort of have multiple people looking at common problems. And this terms of reference is to just establish what the group is going to work on and how they'll function within our organization.
Thank you. Could I have this marked as the next exhibit, please?
That's already been marked as Exhibit 1848 on the Commission's list from yesterday.
Okay, thank you. Before I leave this topic, Mr. Wong, to close the loop, as a habitat manager,
I'm sorry, just rise. I wonder if we could pull up 1848, because my note is that 1848 is something different.
mine too, but
I wonder if we could please pull up Exhibit 1848. My note is that it is something different than the document that's on the page, yes.
We're just realizing that now.
Yes.
It looks very similar.
Okay, if we could, then perhaps Mr. Fougere would like to again seek to have the last document marked.
yes, I would seek to have the terms of reference marked, please.
Right. That'll be 1880.
Are you concerned about IPPs right now in relation to sockeye populations?
I would say that we don't see them as a particular imminent concern specifically, because most of the IPPs that are coming in are in places that are not interacting or intersecting with sockeye. It's not to say that that concern, there is no concern ever. If IPPs continue to be something that is emphasized and development is pursued across a wide portion of the landscape, we can foresee that becoming a potential issue, but at this time it's not one that's high on the list.
Thank you. Now, I guess housekeeping matter, if we could please call again document 14 on Canada's list of documents. We had an issue with this earlier. I believe the document 14 on our list is the compliance protocol. I have the ringtail number, that's 437263.
Yes, Mr. Commissioner, I'm just consulted with my friend from the province. They have, I believe that somehow the wrong document has been loaded on by the Commission, that Mr. Fougere did in fact give us the compliance protocol at number 14.
Perhaps while we wait for this, Mr. Wong, just my last category of question was on the issue of drought response and tools. And you've said a bit earlier that the Fisheries Act was not an ideal tool to manage water. And you've explained to the Commissioner the difficulties in moving forward with Section 35 prosecutions in respect to water use. Would you agree that the Fisheries Act nonetheless gives you the authority to engage users and apply pressure in order for them to do actions that are less harmful for fish?
Yes, certainly. I think I may have undervalued the potential of the Fisheries Act as a tool. It's not to say that it's a perfect tool, but there's value in terms of being able to apply pressure, and there are certain circumstances where it can be used very directly in terms of issuing an order under Section 22(3) or advising someone that their activities are either currently or imminently going to be causing a harmful alteration to fish habitat, and being able to apply regulatory authority in that regard.
Thank you. And Mr. McGowan has marked the new June 2010 BC Drought Response Plan as Exhibit 1869. Mr. Wong, since that new drought response plan has been in place, how do you assess the relationship between the province and DFO on drought response issue?
It's better than it's been in my time at DFO. I would say that it's been very useful in terms of the leadership and coordination that the province have taken on drought response, and we saw that last year, and we've seen that very recently this year, even in the southern interior, which had, I think, the driest August on record, and we went from a situation where no drought was foreseen to having some fairly serious conditions, and having the drought framework and response plan in place has helped considerably.
Thank you. Mr. Commissioner, those were my questions, subject to clarifying. I was hoping to mark our tab 14. Perhaps one of my friends can deal with this later.
Mr. Commissioner, there's, I guess, a couple of ways we can do it. Subject to your approval, I'm content for a hard copy to be put to the witness, and Mr. Fougere can ask his question, and we can attend to having an electronic copy put in place over the lunch hour if that is agreeable to you. The alternative,
Certainly.
I guess, is somebody else could ask, or Mr. Fougere could ask the question later.
We have a hard copy available.
We do. I provided Mr. Giles with a clean copy, which can be put before the witness.
I was simply hoping to have Mr. Higgins identify a document and briefly tell us what the compliance protocol is about and have it entered on the record. So, Mr. Higgins, is this something you're familiar with?
I am.
Could you please describe what's the context for this compliance protocol?
The context for this protocol, it was in the face of conflicts, we found that we needed to find a way that we could engage with the regulators in a predictable way. And so through that Fish Hydro Committee that you showed me the terms of reference for, we developed this protocol so that there would be a predictable way that we could resolve conflicts.
Thank you. So, could that please, Mr. Giles, be entered as the next exhibit?
Yes, that would be marked as 1881.
Thank you, panel. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Those are my questions.
Yes, Mr. Commissioner, the province of British Columbia will be next, and we will attend over the lunch hour to having an electronic copy entered as the exhibit.
Yes, Mr. Commissioner, Province of British Columbia, Cliff Prowse. From time to time, it's possible you may see my lips moving, but hear Mr. Tyzik's voice. But we're going to do our best to let me do the talking. Ms. Krywokin, sorry, Ms. Panchik, could you turn to BC tab 1, please? Ms. Krywokin, this is the 2008 Living Water Smart BC's water plan. Can you say how that relates to the discussion plan that's been marked as an exhibit this morning, or actually, I think it may have been yesterday?
Yes, the Living Water Smart plan contains a number of commitments which speak to reforming BC's water laws in the province, and it's from this document that the Water Act modernization process originated.
All right, and if you can turn to the end of the document, pages 90 and following, please, Ms. Panchik.
It's okay.
That's the correct page. So this, the first heading is called Doing Business Differently. And then we follow with different headings through pages 91 through 95, 2 of which are Preparing Communities for Change and Choosing to be Water Smart. What's the significance of this plan at a glance part of the document, Ms. Krywokin?
So the plan at a glance document contains the 45 government commitments around water, and 19 of those 45 specifically speak to water law reform.
All right. Mr. Commissioner, might that be the next exhibit?
1882.
Ms. Krywokin, I'm not going to go to the documents marked as exhibits 1870 and 1872, which are the discussion paper and the technical background report dating to February and March of 2010, but there has been engagement with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans up to and since those February, March 2010 dates.
That's correct.
And there's also different technical committees and groups that are working on the Water Act modernization. I think Dr. Bradford said he was a participant. Are there other participants from Department of Fisheries and Oceans?
Yes, Dr. Bradford, Kim Hyatt, Dean Watts, Melody Farrell, Celia Wong
All right.
are some of the few individuals that we.
And I think we've heard that the working relationship with DFO on this issue has been very good.
Yes.
So, Mr. Commissioner, if we could turn then to Exhibit 1873, which is the report on engagement. And at page 3, it's executive summary. So, Ms. Kreiwoken, I wanted you to turn to the fourth paragraph, if we could highlight that, Ms. Panchak. In addition to. So can you just describe what the report is telling us as of the date of the report in September 2010?
Would you like to hear the key? Well,
The
what in
key
general we
points
heard?
as outlined in, starting from what's outlined in writing there, and just elaborating a bit.
So the process of engagement, once the discussion paper was released, involved 12 workshops, 3 First Nation workshops, and written submissions. We've, the input from those engagement meetings culminated in this report on engagement. And as you scroll down the page, you'll see a highlight of some of the key themes that we heard from respondents.
And the first one at the bottom of the page is to do with protecting stream health, clear standards. Can you, so that was one of the themes that you heard?
Clear standards and certainty around process and clarity around roles and responsibilities.
And then turning to the next page, Ms. Panchak. So groundwater extraction and use, and that's something that we've heard discussed yesterday and today already.
We heard a strong call from respondents to regulate groundwater use in the province.
The next bullet is improve current groundwater governance arrangements. What did you hear about that in a nutshell?
We heard that British Columbians want more of a say in water decisions and have a number of proposals and suggestions around how locally and local water boards or local advisory bodies may help inform water management functions and decision making.
All right, and the next one is proactively protect drinking water, food production, clean energy, and ecological health. So that's, again, that's something you heard from the participants?
We heard this mix from a variety of sectors, drinking water as a priority of use. The agriculture sector spoke to the importance of water for food security. We heard the importance from the energy industry around importance of water to clean energy. And we heard from many across those sectors, including NGOs and First Nations, the importance of protecting ecological health.
All right, the next heading is recognize land-water connection.
So we heard overwhelmingly, while the Water Act modernization is focusing on the water resource, that it's from respondents that it's not just about water resource, it's also about watersheds, and that what happens on the land base affects the health of the water. So this in particular was a response to the policy direction around better linking land and water, and we heard support for that.
All right, and the next heading says balance ecological protection with economic priorities.
So this spoke to two sides, the importance of environmental protection and also and the important natural goods and services that ecosystems provide to communities, to environment and economies. And we also heard the importance of water as an underpinning to virtually every industrial process in the province, and the certainty around a water allocation regime for water users and economy is equally important.
All right. The next bullet is First Nations interests must be respected, and I'm not going to ask you to turn to it, but there's some elaboration on this topic at pages 67, I think, and 68 of the document, as I recall. Is that right?
Yes.
And the bullet identifies key themes that emerged from what you heard from First Nations?
Yes, and in particular, we heard concern about provincial ownership of the water resource. We heard concern about Aboriginal rights and title. We heard concern about the process of engagement around Water Act modernization from First Nations, and a strong plea for more time so that draft legislation could be reviewed and be further consulted on.
And then the next heading leads to the province's timelines for modernizing the Water Act and are too short. That was something you heard up to September 2010?
That's correct. We heard resoundingly on the first round of the discussion paper in the spring of 2010. Government had not planned to produce a further policy proposal. With hearing the resounding call for more engagement on proposals, that led to the release of the proposal paper in December 2010. We've heard this again on the second round of engagement this past spring, that more engagement on the details of the legislation is warranted and requested.
And so I understand from your comment this morning that, in fact, their expectation now is that there will be draft legislation in 2012, and further engagement there is...
That's correct.
And following on from that was the policy proposal, which is found at tab 5 of the province's documents. I believe has already been marked as an exhibit, Mr. Commissioner. We believe 1856. Thank you. So this is the policy proposal that followed from the engagement. Is that correct?
Yes, from the first round of engagement.
And at page the Water Act modernization continues as a heading, and on page 3, and again, the objective of the document is explained in the 2 bullets, is including summarizing where we're at, and provide further opportunities for engagement. And if you turn then to the what I believe is page 7, table 1. So this is can you explain the approach that's set forth here? We've heard from questions this morning, and in particular concerns yesterday, that there should be a blanket approach and everything should be licensed everywhere. What's the approach that's set forth on page 7 here, table 1? Can you explain the concepts?
So this framework really underpins the basis on which we're building the proposed new act. It recognizes the hydrological diversity in the province and that no one size fits all across the province. There are some provisions and tools in the toolkit that would apply province-wide, and that's addressed in the first box. The second and third speak to known problem areas, and then areas where we have chronic problems. The tools in those respective areas are increased to incorporate more detailed water resource assessments and watershed sustainability plans. So it embodies the area-based approach that is being taken, where we need to raise the bar across the province for some provisions and really focus efforts specifically on some key tools in key areas.
Mr. Commissioner, it appears to be 12:30 or close to it. Would you like to take the break now?
Thank you. Hearing is now adjourned until 2 p.m.